5, a petition drive was launched today looking to guarantee paid sick leave for Nebraskans who work for large and small companies.
If the ballot initiative passed, it would require Nebraska businesses to give employees 1 hour of paid sick leave for every 30 hours worked. It would apply to full-time, part-time, and temporary employees. However, it won't apply to those who work federal, state, or county jobs. Joe Giles, one of the advocates behind the initiative, believes there are thousands of Nebraskans who work full-time and do not get any paid sick days.
No Nebraskan should have to choose between their paycheck and their health or the health of their family.
If passed by the majority of Nebraska voters in November 2024, paid sick leave would go into effect on October 1st in 2025.